Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, and you're listening to the first episode of Dev Rel and Dev Advocacy, the podcast. Now, this will be a podcast where, at least for these first couple episodes, I'm going to focus more on sharing sort of my experience and tips and things that I've learned along the path to in developer advocacy. So this first episode, we're going to focus on like what is developer advocacy and just tell you sort of my story, so you know the my backstory of how I got here and the experiences sort of inform the way I do things and why I do things. Okay, and then once we kind of get through that, we'll in future episodes we'll bring in other people who are also working in the DevRel Dev Advocacy space, have interviews, and see what we can learn from them. Okay, so this is the first episode, so hopefully you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, whether that's iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, but also make sure to follow me on Twitter. So if you are more of a web developer, then follow me at Alex Merced Coder. If you're more of a data professional, follow me on AM Data Lakehouse. So that's Alex Merced Coder. That's where I generally post more webby stuff. And then AM Data Lakehouse, where I post more data-y stuff. Okay. And then either way, you can also add me on LinkedIn. Just look up Alex Merced. There, I only have one profile. Okay, I keep it simple there. And otherwise, and also subscribe to all my other podcasts. Just type my name into any podcast search, and you'll find the other things I talk about. Okay, including a web dev podcast, a web called Web Dev 101, and a data podcast called Data Nation. So now that we got all those obligatory plugs out of the way, let's talk about DevRel Dev Advocacy. Okay, what is DevRel Dev Advocacy? So DevRel is short for like developer relations. Think of it like public relations, but okay, in public relations, your target is the general public. So sort of the way you communicate, the way you craft your messages towards a very broad audience. So in dev relations, your audience is not the public, but the developer community. So the way you craft your message and who your audience is different, although a lot of the same ideas apply. But again, understanding there basically, since you have a much narrower audience, there does require to be a much better connection to that audience, okay, and stronger knowledge of that audience to successfully be able to communicate that. Okay, and then developer advocacy, which sometimes what these roles do and with how they're defined still is very much in flux because it's somewhat of a new role in the space. I want to say like new, as much as it was, let's say, a couple of years ago, but still new-ish enough that like, what is DevRel? What is Dev Advocacy? Still very much a question, even by people who have those titles. Okay, and by the people who hire for those titles. It's like we know we want one, but we don't know why. But yeah, so basically, but the job of developer advocacy typically is also kind of in that same realm, where you're building a community, where you're building a connection with the greater developer community. Now, generally, who needs a developer advocate? Who needs a DevRel function? Okay, generally these are going to be companies who have a product that serve developers. Okay, or a portion of their product that serve developers. So, for example, if you are, let's say, Facebook, okay, while your main product, the Facebook social network application, is generally geared towards the general public, okay, the way you enhance that product and use of that product is for other applications to build on top of yours through Facebook's APIs. So then Facebook would want a developer advocate or a DevRel professional to kind of help build that awareness. Say, hey, we at Facebook have these APIs. Here's how you can use them to enhance your apps. And since as you enhance your apps with Facebook goodness, that also ends up serving Facebook because that reach of the Facebook application and what people can do with their Facebook accounts just continues to grow. Okay, so that's essentially like the developer advocate, DevRel, like sort of like the objective. The idea is to get people to communicate with other developers the value of using a thing and to essentially drive adoption. Okay, but there's, of course, like it's just basically marketing, but in marketing, again, there's different goals, not just adoption. Adoption is sort of like the end goal. Okay, I mean, you think other ideas like awareness, branding, and things like that. But essentially, that's the general goal of the function. Okay, but again, it's got to be done slightly differently because if you ever met people in the tech space or developers in general, they're going to be a lot more skeptical of, let's say, like marketing talk. So if I come there and saying like, sounding like the music man just coming into town and talking about how awesome it is to start a band, you're gonna get some pushback. Okay, and that's why it's tough to hire for these positions, because you need someone who can talk the talk, who understands the actual technical side of things. You need someone who's been a developer for the most part. Okay, that's why it's called Developer Advocacy Dev Rel. The idea is you are a developer whose job is to talk to other developers. But of course, that means you also need to have a strong set of understanding of communication. So being able to understand how to speak, and again, that's a skill that you can develop over time. Again, if you watch videos, I've done probably tens of thousands of YouTube videos over the years on different topics, going all the way back to about 2007. And you go all the way back there, the amount of ums, oohs, ahs, and awkward pauses and weird sentence structures back at that time, and lack of gravitas was much, much different than I am today. Now, again, I still have my ums, I still have my imperfections, mainly because I speak generally extemporaneously. I'm a much better talker when I'm just sort of just talking, or at least a more engaging speaker. Okay, and that's going to differ for different people. Some people are going to excel better when they plan their talk. Some people are going to be better when they just kind of go off the cuff. The idea is you need to find that mode where you are comfortable, where you can speak confidently, because that's really what's important. At the end of the day, good communication is all about confidence and clarity. Okay, so you find out what is the approach where you can deliver it most confidently, and then you practice for clarity. Okay, so you need to have sort of that appreciation for communication, appreciation for marketing. So again, understanding the principles of marketing. So thinking about things like not just what your product is, but sort of where do people care about your product. Okay, so if I head over to I work as a developer advocate for Dremio. Now, if I head down to the local Walmart and set a stage and say, hey, I'm going to do a big demo for how to build a lake house, in, let's say, the Walmart produce aisle, that probably wouldn't be effective. It could be the greatest presentation. I could have communicated perfectly, illustrated all the best features in the best way, and no one would care, because that's not the place where my target market is at. Okay, so think of, again, product, place, price, all those things that if you've ever taken a marketing class, you've probably heard a bajillion times. Okay, and if you haven't, I have some old episodes of a podcast I used to do called Brand Me. You can find on YouTube. You can find those old episodes. I go over a lot of marketing concepts there. I'll probably go over a lot of that stuff in this podcast, but we'll see how this evolves. Again, this is the first episode. What content there will be, we will see. Okay, so basically, and then last piece, education, because part of when you're marketing to developers, oftentimes the gap between them seeing the value in adoption is ease of use. Okay, so oftentimes a developer will use things and make their life easier, and they're more willing to adopt those things if people give them the documentation, the tutorials, the videos to use it easier, to get to bridge the lack of knowledge they have about the thing that can make their life easier quicker. Okay, I mean, I'm someone who generally just loves learning different programming languages and different frameworks and trying things out, and I don't mind the challenge of having to go read through source code, or having to go through all sorts of really weird Stack Overflow comments just to figure out a problem. That is not the majority of people. Okay, there's only so much time in a day, and if people have a set of tools that they're already comfortable with, and they kind of, even if it's harder, they know how to get from point A to point B. But even if your tool is easier, but they can't find the information they need to get from point A to point B, well, that's going to hurt adoption too. And again, whatever documentation and tutorials and what you do have to be written in a way that's understandable to someone who may not necessarily know every terminology. Okay, so you have to kind of have that education mindset of knowing, okay, how now, not only how do I communicate, but how do I break down ideas for transmission. Cool. So, and essentially, these are the things, those are the skills you need as a developer advocate. And again, those are skills you can develop. Those are skills you can learn as you do the thing. But those are the skills you should be constantly striving to develop: your communication, your tech skills, your marketing knowledge and understanding, and your education. Okay. I have been fortunate enough that basically my life story has led me to kind of accumulate those pieces in a really roundabout way. So I feel like I'm a video game character who did a bunch of side quests, and now, just happens to be ready for the final boss because the amount of random side quests he did. But it is what it is. Here I am. Cool. Okay, so now that we know what the skills are, let's talk about like what the general responsibilities are, like of Dev Rel Dev Advocacy, and that's going to be different everywhere. Okay, some Dev Rels are purely focused on just sort of like speaking, so going to conferences, speaking on podcasts, running a podcast, being sort of like a bullhorn. Some are focused on more written content, so basically writing a lot of blogs and doing partner blogs, stuff like that. That are tutorials. Some are more focused on just going out there and meeting with sort of existing customers and building relationships with the developers and existing customers who are using a product in that capacity, and just being sort of that liaison between customers and the product and engineering teams. Because at the end of the day, like the engineering team, they're going to look at things from the engineering point of view and be like, okay, we're building this thing. Here are the constraints that we have in building it. We're delivering it. Here it is. Product is always going to be thinking, okay, hey, what features do customers want, and are we delivering those features? Okay, and basically the developer advocate can really play the role in being in there talking about like, hey, how do you feel about the existing features? Like, is the exact form ergonomic for you? Okay, and kind of find out like, hey, what do they really enjoy, and say, hey, come back to the product and engineering team and say, hey, we need more of this and less of that. Okay, so that's definitely can be part of what a developer advocate brings on board. Okay, so again that whole like public relations, developer relations aspect of it. Where in public relations, you're oftentimes trying to build these relationships, in order to have a bigger mouthpiece. Same thing in developer advocacy. So bottom line is, it's a sort of all of the above kind of role. Okay, so and then I would say more often than not, you're doing all of those things essentially of relationship building with sort of existing and prospective customers, doing sort of outbound speaking, whether through audio or video or live performances, and then content creation via writing again or video audio. And you're generally doing all of the above. Basically, you want to be a recognizable face when people think of that product, the face that they can go to for honest, earnest help. Okay, if you're doing developer advocacy well, when people should feel comfortable reaching potential customers and current customers, and people who are just curious should feel very comfortable reaching out to you, and they should feel comfortable that when they come to you, that you're going to try to be sort of, in their corner when it comes to finding the answers they need. Okay, and there's always going to be you're always going to run into those roadblocks with those there's a question you can't answer and things like that. But the idea is that your job is really sort of to be sort of that very visible positive association with the product and the brand. Like, because people should be like, okay, one, they should like the product, but two, they should like you. Okay, and then the fact that they like you should then translate over to them liking the product even more, being like, oh, because that's generally how like human behavior works. Okay, whether it's rational or irrational, people will like things or dislike things more based on their opinion of people they associate with it. So the idea here, like, you're putting that sort of positive foot forward. And again, these are not things that you can necessarily fabricate. These are things that have to be in part and parcel of like who you are. And again, if you don't feel like that's who you are right now, doesn't necessarily mean that's all of these are skills you can develop. Okay, like even positivity and positive thinking and having a positive attitude, these are things that are skills that are not like people say, oh, this is like my personality. Like, I generally believe like almost just about everything is a skill. Okay, and you can develop anything. Because I definitely, there was a time, I am naturally extremely introverted. Okay, like, if you ever cross paths with me, I can be very sociable in a conversation, but I will generally be very quick to leave a room when I have a chance to not be around lots and lots and lots of people, and oftentimes spend a lot of time myself. Not that I don't enjoy being with other people. I definitely, like, if you reach out to me, you talk to me, I love talking to you. But generally my default is going to be sort of to isolate. Okay, so being sociable and learning to talk and learning to be to give off that warm vibe was a skill that I had to develop. Okay, and I think that's very typical in sort of like the tech space where a lot of times you probably are naturally more introverted to be of a higher like technical skill level because it does require a lot more sort of time alone and meditating on like a lot of the knowledge that you need to sort of like inject into yourself to kind of get to that sort of higher level of sort of technical knowledge. So I don't think that is which is again another thing that makes it kind of difficult to hire for like Dev Rel, Dev Advocate roles because it's hard to find people who can be technically knowledgeable, authentic in the technical level of their communication, but then also like be outgoing enough, speak and communicate clearly enough, and all these other things. Like it's a weird mix of skills. Is my point. Okay, so now that we kind of talked about like what Dev Rel Dev Advocacy is, what the role potentially could be doing, and again, there's a variety of variations on this. So again, you could work at 10 different places as a Dev Rel or Dev Advocate professional and get 10 very big variations on the same story. But generally, you'll see that it's kind of always kind of moving in this direction. The general thrust of what my goal is. Okay. But now let's talk a little bit more about sort of like my stories, like how did I get to this point, and sort of like what are the experiences that helped me develop the 4 sort of areas of skills that I mentioned. Okay, so my interest. Let's focus on my interest in technology. Okay, so as I mentioned, I was an introvert, so when I was a young kid, I played a lot of video games. And growing up, I really wanted to be a video game developer, like many avid video game players in their younger days. And I would like to play with tools like RPG Maker. Like RPG Maker was like this visual tool where you can make literally role-playing games, like old school, like 8-bit looking role-playing games. Specifically, RPG Maker 2000 was the version that I was particularly using a lot. And that was fun. And that's probably where I started really learning that and like basically making HTML web pages on GeoCities when my mom would go to college. So basically, I was raised by like a single mom, and she, basically she would be working like 2 jobs and going to college. So instead of like getting babysitting, she would leave us like in the computer lab at college, and I would just like play around and make like Dragon Ball Z fan fiction websites on GeoCities when GeoCities was still around. And if you don't remember what GeoCities is, because I'm old, it was basically in the early days is one of the tools you would use to make a website. It was from Google, or Google eventually purchased it. But what GeoCities did is that you could have like a what you see is what you get editor, but then you could also upload HTML files. So I learned HTML and CSS to create websites on GeoCities, so I can be part of like the greater like online Dragon Ball Z community at the time. And then 2, I was making RPGs using RPG Maker where you didn't write, let's say like a programming code, or you didn't write code, but you would script things out through like a visual editor. So you would like write if statements, create variables, script out cutscenes, things like that. And that got me to think a lot about like sort of like this. So this is like mid high school. So I'm starting to get exposed to a lot of these sort of like technical bits at that point. Then my high school was a very unique one. It was called what's in Connecticut is called a regional vocational technical school. I grew up in Connecticut. I spent a long time in New York City after college. I went to college in Ohio, and right now I live in Orlando, Florida, or in the Orlando area, just to give you my quick geography. But essentially what happened is that in my high school was the school where basically you would like dedicate yourself to a trade. So my trade was like microcomputer. So I basically studied using all the different types of like Microsoft Office programs quite in depth, and then 2, learning C++. So I had spent a couple years playing with C++, nothing super in depth, and then I went to college for computer science. At first, my first semester I was a computer science major. I did eventually change my majors to cultural studies and marketing. But I do another semester like C++ at that point, and then I go into cultural studies in marketing. So basically, that's where I start learning a lot about marketing. I get involved with like the local radio station, so that's where I start learning to like broadcast and put together on a show. And I experimented a lot in college, as far as like learning different marketing ways of promoting a brand and establishing a brand. Because that was always one of my favorite things to do, is just like create a brand and establish it and try to build like brand equity. I just found it very fascinating to kind of create something that didn't exist before, like a thing that people recognize, that people see, that basically take something that was intangible and make it tangible. So I would do this through I would run a concert. Basically, I took my experience at the radio station that eventually became me running my own concert promotions agency. And there was a brand, there was a logo, it was called Fashionably Numb Music, and over after several years of promoting concerts, basically instead of paying to go see my favorite bands, I would try to make money to bringing my favorite bands to campus. Figured, hey, I didn't really have a car at the time, so it was just easier to bring them to me. And that was a good time. After a while, brands started reaching out to me to book them for concerts, and I became a recognizable figure in that space in the Bowling Green music scene for a period of time. So that was really cool. It started getting me thinking to do another experiments. Basically, by just putting that brand on all sorts of flyers and basically branding my concerts and saying, hey, this was a production of Fashionable Music. I'm really thinking is that more people see the brand, more people see the thing, the more people associate it. So then I did a really, really weird, a really weird experiment. So what I did one day is I woke up really, 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 really early, printed out a bunch of flyers for a fake fan club, like a fake Alex Merced fan club. No one knew who I was. I'm not so basically it would be funny to see just how people react. So I went over to every room on campus and literally posted this flyer before the classes started that day. Okay, so that everyone's coming. So basically, what happens is that every day, one who went to that class that day, they saw the flyer. They're like, okay, so this is a guy called Alex Merced, and he has a fan club. I just wanted to see what the reaction would be. So then what would happen is that when I would go to different events and show up on campus, people started recognizing me. They didn't know why. They just knew that they recognized me and that they knew my name. And that kind of led to other opportunities, and that established a brand pretty much out of thin air. So point is the point I'm trying to drive is the importance of visibility. Okay, the what you can get from visibility, and also just being able to leverage things you do into other steps. So I leverage it, how I leverage being part of the college radio station into starting a college promotions outfit. So the idea is okay, hey, everything can be used as a stepping stone to the next thing to build your reach. Okay. Starting. Well, there's gonna be a lot of episodes of the podcast, so I don't necessarily want to kind of give everything away in the first episode, but just to kind of fast forward. Also, while I was in college, I started a comic book store with a friend of mine. I'll tell that full story another time. It's a really interesting story. But eventually, I do go back, or I do graduate, and then I decided to move to New York City. In New York City, originally I started out in marketing in the fashion industry, so I'm working as mainly as a marketing intern, and I'm being a liaison with the PR firm for this shoe company. They design shoes. But at the same time, I also ended up getting a job as a stockbroker and go get my Series 7 and Series 63 license. And then I ended up finding a job, originally I was hired for my technical abilities to help develop sort of online learning systems and do administrative work for this training company called Greco Financial Training. But anyone who knows me, whenever I am somewhere, I try to learn everything and how to do all the things and be involved in all the things. So I eventually get involved in everything. Eventually I become sort of the lead instructor. So I go from just sort of kind of helping them set up online courses with their current instructors to becoming the lead instructor, learning all the material, delivering the material. So I spent a decade doing that, traveling the world, training people with lots of zeros in their bank accounts, how to pass license, how to get their licensing exams, and that was an interesting experience. But it also got me really comfortable at speaking extemporaneously, because bottom line is we prided on ourselves and not generally having a script in front of us and just being able to talk. So I had a lot, and then I would be teaching for sometimes 12 hours a day. So basically just 12 hours a day of talking, and really that was a unique amount of experience that really, really honed my ability to and then also having to create new curriculum as new licenses came out. I'd have to actually go do the research, create the curriculum, and then deliver it. And then on top of it, I was sort of generally in charge of all the online marketing, and basically I wore every hat to some extent. So it allowed me to like learn a lot about like just digital marketing, web development because I had to manage the website, eh, on top of just like doing a lot of speaking. So I did that for a long time, but eventually I wanted to leave New York City. So I was like, I really enjoyed development. I really still enjoyed coding a lot. I would still dabble in like C, C++, Python here and there, mainly out of an interest in blockchain at the time. So then I eventually decided to take the plunge and go back to learning how to code in a more sort of like rigid discipline and join a boot camp. And I go hardcore. And I know at this point I've already had a lot of experience establishing brands because there was also this weird like splash into politics at some point. I'm not going to get into that. But that definitely taught me a lot about marketing, about building connections, and connecting with people. Um, so I take all that knowledge and I'm thinking, okay, well, going into this new career, I need to establish my brand now. So I start like the Web Dev 101 podcast, literally just even as I'm starting my boot camp. I'm creating videos, teaching things as I'm learning them, because that's essentially what I would do for 10 years in the financial space. I would learn things and then I would teach them. Okay, I developed a pretty good rhythm of being able to ingest information and immediately output it as curriculum and feel comfortable delivering it confidently and with authority. So yeah, so basically I start doing that right away. So basically as I'm learning, I am creating content, basically being on that other side of teaching the things. So I'm establishing that, and those videos get reasonably popular. Like I wouldn't say like there's definitely much bigger YouTube coding channels, but I develop a niche. And then same thing, just posting a lot of that stuff on LinkedIn or whatnot. My brand gets established. So basically, it was a very smooth transition between careers. I ended up working as a web developer for a couple of years, also doing a lot of freelance development jobs on the side. One of the most interesting ones is like creating a application that took in like genetic, basically data from a genetic scan, and basically outputting it onto the screen so that way it's easy to kind of see sort of what genetic variants you have. That was a really fun application, and also it was where I really started kind of dabbling into sort of the data world, because it was a lot of the processing of that data that required me to work with like pandas and things like that on the back end before then that gets outputted as like a PDF or a page or whatnot. So, but I was always had like an interest in databases and whatnot. So I eventually kind of also then shift here into the database where I am now as a developer advocate for Dremio. But again, I just haven't stopped as far as like, doing all those things regarding like, again, marketing, communication, technical skill development, and education. So that is sort of like where my experience comes into play, like how I develop the body of knowledge and intuition that I've developed over the years, and which hopefully seems valuable enough to learn from, that you'll listen to future episodes of this podcast. And if not, if we ever cross paths, say hi. Always love to talk. And again, if you are in the Dev Rel space, I highly recommend joining this Dev Rel Discord community. You can find it in the podcast description. And then I also have a couple Slack communities I run for the web development space and the data space, and several podcasts that I run. You can just search my name. But this is the first episode of Dev Rel and Dev Advocacy, the podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. My name is Alex Merced. Have a great day and enjoy.